Is approval of the agenda?
I move we approve the agenda.
Second.
Been moved in second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes. Next item is the consent agenda. Any comments or questions on those items? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Been moved in second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes. Is there anybody here from the public that'd like to speak to something that's not on the agenda? All right, special reports and presentations. Chief.
Good evening, guys. Wanted to take a minute to introduce one of our newest officers to you guys. He's actually been with us for a little while now, but due to scheduling conflicts and things like that, this is the first night we've been able to actually bring him to introduce him in person with you guys. But this is William Ace Buttram. He goes by Ace. That's his middle name. He comes to us from Panama City, Florida, where he has been 10 years active duty in the U.S. Air Force. And when he was looking to cycle out, he was finishing his enlistment period. He and his family were looking to relocate back to this area, and he chose Baldwin City to come and work. He had many, many options to him. He competed at other agencies as well, but we were lucky enough to steal him and very fortunate to get him. He went to the 287th class at KLETC because he had not had formal civilian law enforcement experience. He was in the security forces in the military, which is basically like the police force for them. But he needed to do civilian training for that. So he went to KLETC, and I know you guys have heard me speak before. Our two previous rookies that we have on staff with us went to the same class at KLETC. One was the class president, and the other one was the class runner-up for president. And it's selected by the class attendees for each one of those classes. And I'm here to tell you that Ace was also selected as class president for his. So we've had back-to-back class presidents come out of our last two academy classes for rookies going to KLETC. We're extremely proud of that, and extremely proud of Ace for that achievement. We do have his family here, and we wanted to do a formal pinning of his service badge with his family. So I would invite Rachel, Joseph, Zachary, and Ezekiel to come up. And Rachel, if you want to do the honors and pin on Ace's badge.
Now, when she sticks, you get hurt. I know that for a fact.
All right. You guys want to take a picture? Thank you, guys. Ace, just a minute. One of the things that we impress upon our officers here in Baldwin City is civic duty. He's demonstrated that time and time again with his military service, and he continues that in the Guard up in Topeka. But he's made the commitment to be part of this community as a law enforcement officer, and that's a hard thing to do these days. And I can't be more proud of him and his family for making that sacrifice, because he did, like I said, he had many options, and he chose us as well as us choosing him. So we're very happy about that. So, and I don't know, Amra, I think you have the oath of office you'd like to give him, and then that will be it. And thank you very much.
Raise your right hand, please.
Yes.
And repeat after me. I state your name.
I, William Bushram,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution and laws
and the Constitution and laws
of the state of
of
Kansas
the state of Kansas
and the ordinances of the city of Baldwin City,
and the ordinances of the city of Baldwin City,
and will faithfully discharge the duties
and will faithfully discharge the duties
of a police officer
of a police officer
of the city of Baldwin City,
of the city of Baldwin City,
so help me God.
so help me God.
And if I can get your signature.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Welcome.
See you on the street, give me some slack.
I had a comment, but I'm not gonna do it.
Don't drink no more, so you can't say that.
I wasn't going to. All right, old business, strategic plan discussion. Glenn, I think you have an update for the council on this.
Right, yeah, our strategic plan facilitator, Patty Gentrup, has two dates. Actually, really, the April 13th is the preference. I'm actually out of town on 27th, so 20, it's a Wednesday, April 13th.
What time?
Well, what time do you want to meet? 6, 7 o'clock? She's pretty flexible, but that's during the evening, so whatever hours work out for you folks, that's.
Anytime after 6 works for me on that date.
All right, should we try for 7? Make it
We'll
work.
do 7.
Okay, I'll tell her that's the date we're gonna do it.
How long are we gonna go, you think?
Well, you wanted, we got a lot of ground to cover, it's gonna be at least 2 hours,
Is it better to do 6?
you know,
What day is that?
If we're
It's
all
a
available after
Wednesday.
6?
Wednesday.
it's a Wednesday.
That way we're not in front of the midnight oil.
Right, yeah, it could go long, but there's a lot of ground to cover under that. And it'll be the final meeting with her, so it'll be the wrap up, so.
Yeah, 6.
Okay, I'll tell her 6 o'clock will work.
Okay.
All right, very good.
Anything else on that agenda item at this time?
We're kind of just waiting on her.
Okay, street improvement plans is another agenda item we said we'd leave on there. We have the work session next Tuesday at 7 on this, correct?
Yeah, I assume that's what you wanted to, that's been set for a while. so.
I guess my only thing is, if we could all come in with at least our tier 1 or our first, our primary goals, and then that way we can kind of hopefully work backwards from there, so that way if we have our primary goals set out on where we want to start this, then we can move to, secondary. I think all of us know that we're not going to be able to do everything all at once, so. I know personally for me, that's really what I would like to come out of that work session with an idea of where the council sits on there.
Makes sense. I assume we're limiting the discussion to the brick portion of the street plan? Or is it the full city street plan where I know we've already got kind of plans in phases already?
I think I'd like to hear from staff what their plan for their phases are currently for the whole
Right.
thing. But I suspected that we would hone in really
Right.
quickly into the brick streets. And go from there.
Yeah, I guess in my mind, to your point around coming in with an idea of what you'd like to see, to me, it's, are you for not removing any bricks at all? Are you for removing them all? Those are kind of the outliers, and if those are positions, and then if you're neither one of those positions, then it's how much, and then it gets down to the discussion of how much brick, if we're not planning to save it all.
Are we going to become involved with public comment at some point in time?
Absolutely. I think that's part of the discussion is how do we
How do we approach it?
approach it? I mean, do we come up with a proposed plan and get community input? Or do we have a discussion and then try to get community input before we make a final decision?
Do we discuss funding as well?
What's that?
Do we discuss funding as well?
Oh, always. I mean, that's gonna be, I think what we need to have is really is accurate cost numbers for repair as well as installation on all 3 options, whether it's, the 3 options we've talked about. And so then it becomes a plan, and then you say, well, how do I fund it? Maybe that changes the plan once you see how you can or can't fund it, or at least the length of time it would take you to fund it all. It's gonna be a multi-year plan no matter what, if, you know, if we do anything. Just like the current street plan is a multi-year plan. We never do it all at once. It's kind of spread out so it fits in the budget. But if we do anything that's really above and beyond what we currently do, we're going to have to find more budget money to do it.
With the 5 of us, there are so many options out there of different directions and different ways to go. This is not going to be something that we can do in one meeting.
No, I don't think anybody expects to, but I think what I think we need to come out of there with is at least a step in the direction of, we have no idea what the council wants on the plan. At least now there'll be some discussion around it. We may still be far apart, but at least then the conversation will be started. Community will have opportunity to make input. You know, ideally we come out of there, we're all fairly close. And then it's a matter of public providing feedback and do we change it? So, I mean, just getting it started has been the hard part. And that's what next week will do.
I'm all for moving.
Yeah.
I know it's gonna take 2 years, but
To make a decision,
yeah.
good. But yeah,
If we start and we all come to 5 different disagreements or 5 different agreements or maybe we can narrow it down to 3 or hopefully 2.
right.
And then we'll have something that we can take to the public.
Yeah.
And get the public's input and then start all over again and go clear back and start at the beginning.
I mean, it's, you know, it really comes down how often we want to meet. If we do it once every quarter, it's going to take us a couple of years. Right? And so it's going to be a matter of how close are we? And then kind of, the council will have to decide how urgent is it to get to a decision on a plan. Might have to meet more to get there, so then we can bake it in. So it's important to try and make a decision before June, if we're gonna make one this year, because we're doing the 2023 budget planning right now. So if any of that's gonna impact that budget, you know, we need to have an idea what that is. If we miss that, that's kind of another year before you really can.
But we also need to consider the fact that it doesn't make any difference what we do. We're not gonna make everybody happy,
Goes without saying.
period. It'll be fun. It's a good move.
We're all anxious to get started on it. But, you know, it'd be nice to have at that, I don't know what you're planning to bring, but just an overhead view of the city, so we can kind of see the brick streets. It's almost like we've got, you know, this is what you have.
Well,
And then we talk about, you know, if somebody said, I want it all, I don't want any of it, or I want some of it. Well, if it's some of it, what are you gonna get rid of?
I think I already think there's some stuff in the mail because I have received some information on chipping ceiling that's going to be taken in city streets I believe this year.
Yeah.
This summer.
And that's part of the current street plan. And we've had street plans forever, and we have one every year. So then this conversation is part of that. Does it change that? Or is it added to the current plan?
No, I'm glad you brought that up. I think it'd be a good use of our time to have that map ready to go so we can,
Oh, yeah.
how many times are we gonna sit there and be like, no, Dearborn isn't in
Yeah.
the bricks. Yes, it does.
I say, yeah, visually, if you can see it, you
Right.
can kind of just say,
So can we have staff help us with that, or I mean, I can
Rob, you can
print something off? Okay, all right.
that would be,
Good idea.
No side question. Julia, did you enjoy your trip with seeing the water stuff?
Yes,
It's quite a deal, isn't it?
yeah, I was gonna talk about that
Well, good.
later.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
So, do you have any current numbers on brick replacement or street work?
Working on those right now, Julie.
Okay.
I'll have that, I'll have a big blown up map, as Scott requested, showing all the brick streets and some
Okay.
different ideas and something we can look at and see real easy.
Okay, that'd be great.
I
Thank
will
you.
have it by next Tuesday, yes.
All right, anything else on that agenda item? We'll move down to power generation.
Come on.
So again, this is another agenda item we agreed to leave on. Scott, I think, kind of talked on it,
Yeah.
finance, if you wanna, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the, we can talk about it now and skip the finance committee part of that, but yeah, we talked about funding for, we're using $1 million plug placeholder for, the incremental 2.5, 3, whatever we end up figuring out. So, the finance committee, we talked about what are our options to fund that? Obviously bonds, everybody knows that's probably the most predominant way to go do that. You just take out a loan and pay over 20 years, whatever the term is. Another thing we discussed was looking at leveraging the reserve fund for the electric utility. And, part of that, when you start having those discussions about the reserve fund, you talk about your policy, what is that? Where are we relative to the policy? What is the fund? And so, talking to, Ben at Baker Tilly, and I think we're significantly, higher than our policy is for, keeping reserve for the different funds in the city. And so I think one of the options we should look at is, can we take $1 million of that reserve fund and just fund this power generation and not do a bond and not have to add it back and see some bond debt payment fall off when, the current plant bond falls off. So what that's going to drive, though, is we need to have a discussion as a council around reserve policy, reserve fund policy. What's appropriate? What's everybody comfortable with? What's recommended, for cities to carry? Because as we use those funds without potentially replenishing them, it will change our reserve amount. So it's a combination of reserve fund policy and is that how we want to try to pay for this next increased power generation?
One comment you made there, and I don't know if I can repeat it or not. You said something about what was, like you're talking about carrying over power, extra power? What
Now,
was-
reserve, so there's,
That's what you, yes.
every fund has, I think our policy is 25% of operating, or I think is it operating or is
Total
it
expenses.
total expenses? So,
Bulk of that's operating.
so fundamentally, it's, the policy is to carry 25% above. If your operating expense is $1 million, you should have $250,000 in your fund at the end of the year,
Over and above,
over and above.
okay.
And so we're well above that in this utility fund. So we need to talk about, what makes sense. Is 25 the right percentage? You hear 4 months operating. There's a bunch of different ways to look at it. But either way, I think this reserve fund is well over that. And if we think it's necessary, we have that discussion. If we don't, then the way I look at it is the citizens have already paid for that, this next $1 million of generation, right? Because we just put it in this fund and now we're going to use it on their behalf.
Is that something that we need to vote on? Or
Yeah.
is that something we can turn to Glenn and?
Well, it'll be part of the budget conversation for sure. Yeah.
We'll have to approve that type of spending in the council.
I understand.
And the mechanism. I think with any ordinances, we've got to specify where those funds are going to come from.
Right.
So we either say we're going to bond it $1 million.
I'm not for bonding anything. We like
Well,
to-
so this is an option, right? And so those are the two options we talked about. And I think, we need to make that decision as a council during this budget process, which will force us to have the reserve fund policy discussion. And then I think we just wrap all that in and we make a decision and move on.
I don't say that facetiously. If it sounded that way, I don't mean it that way. I'm open, I guess, what I really needed to say is I'm open for a discussion on that, but I would sooner not have to bond anything.
Are we gonna have a work session on the budget
Oh, yeah.
anytime soon?
First work session in May.
Oh, in May,
First
okay.
one. So we probably need a list of all these items that we need to talk about, plus then how do we get the department in for their,
They'll come in,
Okay.
yeah.
so we're probably gonna need more, I think, work sessions than
We'll need more than one.
more. Yeah, I think we had one every month.
Yeah, typically we have one
Typically,
in
we
May,
might need
June,
more
and
than
July.
that.
Yeah. Maybe.
If we're talking funding for brick streets in the budget, we're talking, power generation, and then obviously, we've got to rationalize in, which we kind of already have on the substation, and what years that will impact. But all that plays into what your debt's going to be as you start adding these things out in time.
Well, and, obviously I don't like to take on more debt either, but if, like, let's say interest rates right now are trending up.
Yep.
So, and we know that the substation is going to take a bond. So I think part of the discussion should be, since would be a quicker bond to where we can fix that $1 million bond, do we save that cash to use it for the substation to reduce that bond amount? Because all indicators point to that interest rates are going to be higher in 2
And
years.
you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, are you?
No, we're just taking that $1 million and holding on to it to put it on an expenditure that we know is going to cost us more money on interest. So you're essentially leveraging your cash now to save more money over the next 20 years. Because we know what interest rates are today, we can bond
Because
that.
it'll be a bigger bond amount.
It'll be a bigger bond
So
amount and a
they
larger
want
interest.
I kind of want to discuss,
What'd she say? What'd you say?
I said the substation is gonna be more expensive than some of the other things. And
Yes,
so
yeah.
the interest you'd be paying more interest if the
Yes.
interest rates go up.
so we're, in the budget committee, where we kind of discussed this, was the rationale that we concluded was we have debt coming off of the existing power plant, right? And it would be really nice if our future spending was just shy of that total amount coming off, so you can have some money going back instead of increasing that base rate for the citizens on their electric bill, utility bill, being able to lower that. And so the idea is that if there's money left over in the reserve fund and our insurance needs don't exceed that 25%, then it would be nice if we could just pay for that for the cash that the citizens have already paid into that reserve and be able to lower the bill at the same time. Am I with you there, Scott?
Yeah, that's spot on, yeah.
Okay.
But to Casey's point, I mean, it gets into, more complex, so what Casey's saying is, that power generation need is sooner than the substation need. So do we do a $1 million bond, and then say the substation's $4 million, I'm just these numbers in my head, then we only bond $3 million for the substation, at potentially higher interest rates, and we use that $1 million the same way,
Sure.
right?
Yeah,
It
Now,
just-
when they get to the point.
that's the
where-
same rationale.
Same rationale.
Yeah.
When we get to the point there where all of a sudden, we've done this part and it's working fine, we don't need to hurry about doing the rest of it? I mean,
I'm not sure, Bob.
Well, it's still the same timeline for both.
Yeah.
The generator that we looked at purchasing is just a quicker purchase than the expenditure for building out the substation.
because when we start this program, or when this program starts, I'm an individual who would like to see the whole thing go all the way through till it's completed in that area. Where the substation's in, where the
Yeah.
the generators are in, where everything's functioning.
Correct, yeah.
Before we move to spending another $1 million to do something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the
Because
plan.
I don't know that I can live without electricity because I like to pop popcorn.
Yeah, I
And
guess so.
I can still walk to town, I don't need a street.
Yeah, I think that's the plan. It's just, there's a lot of things that go into it that so we have to make one decision that impacts the next, that impacts the next. So if we can talk about all of them at the same time, we kind of know what all those downstream impacts are going to be. And it's a much more difficult decision to say, yeah, I'm going to use, I want to either pay for this power generation with another bond, or I'm going to use the reserve fund. I mean, it's a
And that's
little,
all gonna go into our strategic planning too, so.
All I was indicating is we have for the power generation and the substation, just using
You're giving us
numbers,
options.
$5 million,
Yeah.
right? And so, but we know $1 million of that can be utilized quicker by getting the generator. So that's all I was saying, it's all the same money.
You're moving options, is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll shut up now. Can we move on to something else?
If you're ready, if nobody else has any comments. All right.
I'm good.
New business utility rate discussion. I mean, you didn't have to wear that contraption to make me feel bad
Good. My job is
for.
My job is done. I can leave now.
You didn't have to go to those.
This is called dedication.
You got pretty good on that
My
thing.
wife's outside. She says the meter's running. No, I'm
The
joking.
bottom of that looks like one big birthday. Do you play golf?
No. No, I don't. But it does look like that. It does. Feels like that too. No, this is a marathon surgery I had to have done. So better do it now than when we're talking about the budget. So, what the city asked us to do is go ahead and look at the water sewer rate studies. And, what you've got up in front of you is what I'm gonna be reading from as well. The second slide kind of shows you an overall, picture of what our purpose was. To analyze any water sewer operations and rates that as they currently stand, and then anything into the future. We project the rates necessary to fund any of the costs that you've got listed there. And we break them down into those different costs: operations, maintenance, debt service, capital reserves. Most of it's in operations, just understand that. When we do that, we review the history of the fund and then make those projections. So jumping right into the water fund, you can see 2018 on the far left, all the way to 22, and this is the cash balance. 2018, 19, 20, and 2021 are actual cash balances. And 22 is the projected, and you can see that projected is a negative 25,000 or 26,005. So there's several reasons that this has happened. One, it's been a while since, the water systems had increases to it, but it's been a while since there's been a reserve there. So in 18 and 19, there were 400,000 and 250,000 injected into the operating fund to forego any kind of increases that was needed. Then in 2021, the water tower ended up being around 103,000. We're carrying 130,000, I believe, in expenses as we move forward in the budget. So that's cost money. The treatment expenses in the water has gone from 662 up to around 900,000 in 2020. In 2021, it's around 50,000 less than that. So there's obviously been expenses in that fund. Some time ago, there was a projection and current rates that were increasing $1 on the consumption charge. In 2021, it was $12.07 per 1,000 gallons. And in 22 right now, it's $13.07 per 1,000 gallons. So that's where the water fund sits as we see it, and it doesn't have any projected rates in it. That's just the way the forecast looks at it right now. If you look at the sewer fund on the next slide, you'll see something that's very similar. A little difference here, though, is in 18, 19, and 20, which are the far left bars. There's around $2.5 million. Those are bond proceeds for a project. The actual operating cash that's sitting there is around 50,000. 50,000 in 18, 120,000 in 19, about 100,000 in 2020. Moving forward in the budget for 2022 on the far right, it's 77,000, and that's a projection. Now, what that does include is what we had discussed last year, the $3 increase to consumption charges, going from $8.38 up to $11. At the time when we discussed that, that was going to be a January 1st increase. That hasn't happened yet. So what's included in the 77,000 right now is a July 1st. So that decision is still to be made, and hopefully that part of the discussion tonight as we move forward. So the next slide just kind of shows you what all we use when we go through our analysis. We use the actuals for 2021, and that's what's built into this as the year closed out. And then any kind of expenses in 22's utility budgets. In that utility budget, we include the water tower maintenance, around $130,000 as a maintenance item, not a capital item, so you won't see it in the CIP. We do look at the CIPs and we ask the staff for the CIPs the expected expenses for those CIPs, and I'll show you those in a minute. On the revenue side, we go conservative at a 0.5% growth. Understand that could go up to 2% and 1%. It really depends on where we're at. Because it's weather related, it can be fairly volatile, and you guys know that too. On the operating expense side, we're at 2 to 4% increases overall, depending on the year that we look at. And then let's go to the next slide. This, and it might be a little bit difficult to see, the CIP as we've got laid out has water utilities around 200,000 on a regular basis from 2024 on. 2028 is around 350,000 forward in total expenses in the CIP set aside. Sanitary sewer goes from 125,000 to 350,000. Again, those are reserves just set aside for any kind of capital needs within those funds. So those are earmarks within each one of those funds. We can go to the next slide. This is where the rate adjustments come in. These are the water rates as we see them on the very far left. It shows a $12 base charge. And then, as I mentioned before, 1307 was the charge that's actually started in January. What the rate adjustment here is required for expenses is another 70 cents, just at 70 cents on top of that at July 1st. Then that's a 5% increase. Going forward, there are 5% increases each of those years, given what the forecast might look like. That could fluctuate one way or the other. Those are all single digits. When we first started this process, they were the first year was far higher than that. That 5%. We were able to get them down to that 5% and still be able to provide a cash flow and get up to the fund balance policy you guys have. The next slide is the sewer fund. $16 is the base charge in January. Again, January, $8.38. In July, it would go to $11.38, and that's it. We're not asking for anything in addition to what we had projected last year. Moving forward, 2023 to 2027, we're at 2%. Then after that, there's zero depending on what capital needs exist out there. If you look at these as far as a water or an actual utility bill is concerned, the next slide will show you about 4,500 gallons a month on the water bill and the sewer bill. The change from January, let's say June to July, would be around $16 a month. Anything beyond that is south of $10. It's around $4.50. It stays around 3.5% combined increase per year. Just kind of an approximate increase. The next slide will show you the projected cash balances. That green bar is the actual your actual 25% fund balance or reserves set aside. The gray bar is where those reserves or the cash balances start coming into play based on current assumptions. Again, low revenue, high expense, right? So given that, you see on the graph on the left, the far right columns of 2026 and 2027 are far above those policy indications. Again, that depends on what revenues are going to look like for the next 4 years in order to be able to hit that projection. That's really as much as a guess as anything on 26 and 27. So if anything, I'd chop those off. But by 25, you're sitting at your 25%. You're sitting right at your policy level for the water fund. The graph on the right shows the sewer fund with those 2%. Again, 26 and 27 of the far two right columns, they're well and above the policy. If you cut those off, then by 2025, again, you'll hit your balance, your reserve balances with those percentages. We did go back and look at, on the next slide, some of the comps, and you know this just as well as I do. If you look at 1,000 gallon a month user, we're kind of right in the ballpark of the average. We're right at the average of those individuals, those entities that are sitting there. If you look at a 5,000 gallon a month, we're higher than most of the other ones. Well, we're higher than all of them. But again, this doesn't take into account if there's any increases as part of their budgets this year. But that's where we sit on the 5,000. This is on the water side. On the sewer side, which is the next slide, same thing, 1,000 gallon a month. We're right there in the average. A little bit, I think Eudora is a little bit higher than us. On the 5,000 gallon a month, it's the same deal as we had on the water. On the water side, higher than most of the others. So given that,
And then, so help me, how do we, so what causes the disparity between 1,000 and the 5,000? So our consumption charge, it's a higher rate, therefore?
those are just your consumption charges are the same.
It's comparable to.
Comparable.
So in other words, if we're average at 1,000, but we're the highest at 5,000, then
Right.
something changed, it's not linear.
Yeah, for the others, they're not linear.
Okay.
We're linear, they're not. What they do is they'll
Scale.
stratify their usage. So the higher the usage, the lower the rate.
Okay.
And that's the reason
Okay.
it comes
That's
down.
what I was-
I think there's 3 of them that do that, and the other 2 are like ours, just a flat rate. That's a good question.
So just to put the graph into words a little bit more. So in the other cities that graduate, it would be the lowest users that are penalized the most.
Yes,
Okay.
because if you think about it, if you got a
Right.
10,000 gallon user at $11,
Right.
that's gonna cost them. That's
Right.
gonna,
You're
it's gonna
passing
rack
that
up
cost
really
off on
fast.
everyone
Yeah,
else. Yeah.
right. And in those other cities, they've got some of those. They've got quite a few of those high-end users that
Right.
generate a lot of that revenue coming in for that usage.
Yeah.
In these graphs, showing like out to 2025, 6 and 7, those don't have any projection of growth in there.
No, they don't.
So that's
It's around 0.5%.
projection of growth.
Right. Right, it's around 0.5%. And the reason we do that is the revenues, going back to look at the revenues over the last few years, I think in wastewater, it's gone from 1.17 million to 1.128 million, so it's actually going down a little bit over a 3-year period. Now, that's total revenues, when you look at it. The utility fees are somewhat the same way. And it's weather related. So if you get a really dry year, you're gonna have a lot more water that you're gonna be using. If you get a really wet year, you're gonna have a lot less water that's gonna be used. Now, that 5 and 2% are forecasts right now, moving forward, right? So every year, like every year we look at that budget, we'll take a look and see what the rate study had against how we finished the year and be able to project something. Right now, as it stands, those 5 and 2% stands firm. This summer, we'll look at what 22 so far looks like, and that may change 23's rates. Our goal was to keep it at a single digit instead of a double digit.
The reason the projected revenues outpace our the reserve fund, is because we're proposing 5% in the rate structure, but you're only projecting 2 to 4 in operating.
Yeah.
Is that part of why they?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's making up some ground.
So
right?
it's a worst case scenario, right? If we do start getting, our operating costs are lower than, what that 5% generates, you can change it to 4 or 3 for that year.
Yeah, right.
How many gallons of water are we using?
It's not fixed in stone.
You know that?
Yeah.
I can get that.
I mean, if you're getting above your reserve, you'd want to change your
We can get that
rate
data
structure
for you.
to stay
I don't have
within
that.
policy.
Where we lose a
Again,
month on water
give up
loss.
25.
Water loss,
Continue.
you know that?
What is water loss?
I,
It's different every month. It's less than 10% generally,
Runs 10%?
less than.
Isn't that a little high?
That's pretty consistent to what it's been as far back as my records go.
Yeah.
That's about what we see.
So if you
Some
lose
years it's higher,
10%,
some years it's lower. It varies by month too. Last month it was about 2%. Overall for the year, I think it was about 12 or 13 last year.
so let's say you lose 7% a year on an average. What's that amount to in dollars?
I don't know off the top of my head, Jerry. Part of that's flushing hydrants, part of that's draining the towers, part of it
But
is
even your,
leaks,
even
part
your,
of it's theft.
even your flush, your hydrant flushing, you keep track of that.
We don't meter that,
You don't meter what you flush,
no,
so you have no idea what you wasted.
no. I don't have any idea what we run out when we drain a tower either. We drain a tower, we open a hydrant and let it go. It automatically diverts to losses.
Thank you.
part of it is we went through this process. Part of what I noticed is the lack of cash for capital to maybe fix some of those issues, whether the meters, they're whatever Rob may need to bolt on to the system to figure out some of that. The lack of cash to do that. That's why, in my mind, it becomes imperative to be able to fund a lot of those things. I know the last time he had an issue, we actually borrowed the money from the electric fund in order to pay it. That's a position you don't want to continue to be in. And what this does is pull you out of that, say in a couple of years. You'll have cash. If those kind of issues happen, those breaks happen, he's got the cash to be able to implement some of that.
I understand that. But that could be different than what you're saying. If we had a
It can,
process,
sure
if
can.
if we had a different process.
Yeah,
And
sure.
I'm not picking on anybody.
Sure.
Ben, what's the difference, you're talking about capital, cash for capital, but don't we have a capital SIP piece of this utility as well in the budget?
Yeah,
So when do you use cash, is it a budgeting issue that there's not enough in the SIP? That we have to use reserve?
yeah, so the only way to get money in that capital improvement fund is to get it out of the operating fund, to get it over there. And in the past, we've used that to offset rate increases in the past. So that essentially gets eliminated. And far back, there was cash generated to where you were pulling 100,000, putting it down into CIP for exactly those type of issues. If Rob wasn't using say $100,000 in allocation on cost, that would actually get pulled down into CIP and then carried over to the next year. And then built up over time to where, and we continue to do that, it's just the cash that's there is going down, so it's still needed within that fund. Balancing the fund is gonna be important from a budget standpoint, as you know.
Yeah, so I think that's the discussion we need to have. I mean, to me, reserve fund isn't really, it's should be theoretically in my mind for emergency use, right? And so
Yes.
you should be operating your utility out of your budget. And the rates would generate enough that your cash reserve within the year meets your policy.
Yeah.
You're not taking it out to do, so
Right.
I think that's the goal.
Yeah.
And so then it gets down to, are we too high? Is it too much? Is it driving the rates too high to try to get to that? I think what you proposed is rate increases to get us to that point
Right.
in the next 3 years.
Right. Yeah.
And we won't be there until 3 years from now.
Right.
Based on the projection.
Like on the sewer fund, you get there in 3 years through a 2% increase.
Right.
After that, you're flush. You've got the reserve set and that set aside for policy and CIP at that point, right? And then assuming that you're balancing revenues with expenses each year, you continue to either build onto those reserves in CIP or, well, really CIP, once you hit your reserves, you just build your CIP up. And you continue to maintain that. No longer are you worried about reserves. Like you say, you set those aside and don't count on them.
The SIP discussion is what we're gonna have in the budget sessions when they bring forward all the projects, the capital expenses they need.
Right.
You know, it's gonna be a longer list than we're gonna be
Yeah.
able to do. And so the question becomes is, if you can't fund it all that they've requested and suddenly it pops up that they need it,
Mhm.
you know, they kind of said, well, we'll see if we can get by without it. Well, they did, then you gotta go to your reserve and go pay for it.
Yep.
And then your reserve starts dropping, and then your insurance policy, you know, goes away, and in one projection, it goes negative. So I think just fundamentally, that's the problem we're trying to solve.
What was it, you had 95 days there for 90 days?
90 days.
Yeah, 25%.
Is that enough?
I guess it depends on the perspective. When we do a
Those
lot
are
of,
the discussions we'll get into. I mean, that's really what it is,
Yeah.
there's guidance that, you know, Ben sees a lot of cities and there's a lot of organizations. You know, there's bond companies that will tell you mins and max, mins that, you know, they need to see or they're gonna rate you poorly and your rates will go up. So all those come into the question. So if we view the reserve as the insurance policy, we need to have the discussion. What possibly would we need to operate for 3 months if no revenues are coming in, right? So the one scenario we talk about, budget finances, you know, the dreaded tornado comes in and just
Yeah.
flattens everything, the plant and all the transmission lines. Your revenues go to zero for that utility, right? So you need to operate, still pay people, and they're trying to repair. So you kind of need to have enough funds to operate to you know, till your emergency funds come in. So it's literally, we need to talk about it, like, what's the right insurance policy? Is it the same for sewer that's underground? Is it the same for water?
I was raised and taught, which does not apply in the modern age, that you maintain and save enough money, more or less, to live a year and pay the bills in the normal way. And I can't hardly see the difference. I'm having trouble with why we wouldn't have a higher, you know, benefit, because, you know, you get a tornado come through like you're speaking of, and your 90 days is done, baby.
Sure.
yeah, that's right.
But there are funds that are available, so it's not like you have, you know, you don't
But
have.
why do we want to always look back and have to depend on other funds?
Jerry, I think that's a conversation we need to have. I think what you're gonna see for the rates we need to charge to have a year's worth of operating, no one's gonna wanna pay that. So we're talking about just trying to get back to a 90-day. If you wanna move that to a year, I can't even, the rates are gonna be, what, three times?
To get you to, and I mentioned that rates were double whenever we got started on this process, and it was that very reason.
Right.
In order to get you to 90 days next year, it's a 25% increase in rates, and that's in January.
Right.
I'm sorry, July. And it follows up with another 18% in
Right.
January. And those are numbers that are just astronomical.
Right.
So what we ended up doing is, unfortunately, borrowing money from the electric fund for 3 years, if it's needed, setting aside a reserve out of the electric fund for 3 years and then paying it back once we hit those reserves.
How do we pay it back?
Out of the sewer fund.
Out of the
Out of the
water
sewer
sewer
reserve.
fund. Once you hit your fund balance, your cash balance reserves, anything over that then gets put back into the electric fund. It's an
If
actual
you
borrowing, it's
utilize
not
it.
taking money.
Is that a continuing thing? I mean, does it
Nope,
just keep
we do it
rolling
one
and
time.
rolling and rolling?
Just do it one time.
That's if we use those funds that are set
If you
aside
use them
from
at
the
all.
Electric fund.
Right? If you use them at all. It's just a set aside. It's not the position you want to be in, to what your
Scott, this
point
is
is.
gonna be fun the next 2
Yeah,
years.
it's not, in my opinion, it's not feasible to carry 100% of your operating. I mean, it just, no one can afford to live here to get to that point. So the question is, and we're struggling at 90, and is 90 days the right for all of the utilities? We treat them all the same? But those are the conversations we need to have. Our policy is
I'd rather
to,
see 180.
That's typically what we see entities with revenue bonds on them.
Well,
There's 180, but then you guys issue GO bonds, so that kind of wipes the slate clean. And you can select your own reserve levels at that point.
So much. Let's move on.
So to summarize, I think you just said it, what you're proposing is a 5%
Yeah, 5% on the water side,
on the water side, starting July 1, and then
Right.
another 5% January.
and well, another 5% January,
And
23.
then $3 that we've already budgeted, starting in July instead of January,
Right,
on the sewer,
and then
and
2%.
2% going forward. So
Right.
that's-
So you're not seeing that 27% over a 5-year period, is that what it's all?
Yeah. But, 26, yeah.
But it doesn't have to be, again, that is all determined on our growth. If we have decent growth, that number can come down.
Right. I do want to point out in 2023, right now, according to ordinance, you go to 1407 regardless. So to say it's a 5% is a little bit of a misnomer. It's really a 30-cent increase rate, but
It's
No.
5% over previous rate, but we'd already planned.
you've already planned part of that already. Yeah, right. Yeah, and growth does take effect, take part of that. That's the good news I got tonight.
Yeah.
What's that?
When you delivered this message to the Budget and Finance Committee, look what happened.
Wow. This is how tough that committee is. I want to be on the Public Works Committee.
Okay, what's the explanation for this? You just like walking around with this thing around?
I do. It gives me a lot of sympathy points.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry for you. Bless your heart. I love you. What the hell happened to you?
No, it's arthritis that I wore myself out
Arthur come
running.
along and got you. Is that it?
Yeah. I just called my wife a bad name and you see where that
So-
ended up.
Is this something we want to work on?
Well, I
and
think-
get the ordinance amended to bring back in front of the council to reflect recommendations?
So let's back up from the July 1 rate change, when we need to do that, and then figure out how much time we have.
Correct, but we can pass the ordinance, we can talk about the ordinance and get it passed prior to, and it won't take effect.
Right, but what I'm looking at is we may need more time to have this
Yeah,
conversation.
that's what I was gonna ask you.
So it's almost like, how much time do we have available before we have to make it to hit a July 1 change?
Change the rate?
Yeah.
Because it needs to be part of the budget conversation.
We'd have to pass it in June.
Yeah.
For July 1.
Yeah.
It'd have to be on budget, June, in the June meetings, one of June.
I prefer to do it in May for citizens.
What's that?
I'd prefer to do it in May, just because if we do increase it for budgeting reasons for the
If you do it,
citizens.
May, but get prepared because it'll pass to June.
This next month.
You gotta have this prepared by July the 1st, is this what you're saying? or
Well, what he's showing is
Month
a
of
rate,
July.
the rate increases
Basic.
for July 1, start July 1. You have to pass an ordinance to change your rates.
Yes,
So
yes. Probably we ought to consider.
I mean, to me, it comes down to the reserve fund discussion. I mean, we've heard a year. We're at 90.
Already,
Does anything else less make sense, you know?
already have that policy on for next agenda written down
Okay.
to add.
I think you gotta get past that, and then I think that ordinance becomes easier. If that's a policy and we wanna go do it, we stay at 90 days, he's kind of giving us the path that spreads the pain out over 3 years instead of just trying to get it back, you know, this year, back to policy this year.
And like Ben said, when the rates were restructured, when we had to restructure the water deal, a lot of them were built in over multiple years. So
Yeah.
this first couple of years, I believe, isn't going to actually be a 5%.
No.
Because a lot of that was already built in for
Right.
scheduled out.
Less than 50-cent add-on from what you've already projected.
Right. I mean, it's a little bit splitting hairs, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's incremental to what we planned, but it's gonna be, the impact to the citizens is gonna be 5%. It was gonna maybe be
Oh, yeah,
only
overall,
3.
yeah. No,
They've been only 3, but now we need it to be 5.
Ben, I'll take advantage of you while you're here and ask a quick question. So, you have a lot of experience, a lot of different municipalities. The type of bonding that we do does not require us to have 180 days reserve. We have a little bit of luxury and flexibility there. Water and sewer, all of our exposure, tornado probably isn't really gonna
Mhm.
do the damage. Can we go less than 90 days?
I would not.
You would not?
I would definitely not do that. I think the bottom is 90.
Yeah, sewer plant and water
Yeah.
towers.
Tornado hit that water tower, that's what, 600,000 right there? That's a big chunk of money.
Just had to ask.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. Yeah.
But, okay, so let's be clear, that's gonna be a capital expense.
Mhm.
Right, so what we need to pay for is really the operating expense while we're doing bonds to, so let's not mix
Yeah.
the reserve fund used for capital replacement of the water tower.
Right.
I don't know if that's a fair comparison. It's, can we operate this, pay for the staff and the operations of everything while we're doing that?
Yeah, you're trying to write paychecks.
You're talking about losing a water tower period, is that what you're talking about?
That was the example that was given.
Okay. We got insurance to cover that, I hope.
Yeah, I would think.
Yeah, so
You
insurance.
gotta get there, but yeah, that's right.
So we got insurance coming back, plus whatever else we
Yeah,
can get.
right.
Because if it happens, the feds are gonna kick in something.
Right, I mean,
Uncle Joe's gonna give you
from a
something.
capital perspective, there's avenues to do that. So to me, it's the operating.
So typically, yeah, to your point, Scott, typically when you look at rates, you're looking at rates to fund not just operating capital and that's it. Setting reserves aside, assuming reserves are already funded, right?
Yeah.
Any kind of rate structure movement is typically just operating in capital. Most of that's typically capital, because your operating is not growing very fast. It's your capital needs that really take off. What this is doing is taking care of 3 of them. It's taking care of operating capital and your reserves. Once your reserves are built up, you set them aside. Now you're just talking about operating capital. So that's kind of where I think some of your
Yeah,
point was.
so I think what you're saying is once we get back to the 90 days, then your rate structure is only supporting,
Exactly.
the
The other
capital
two.
and operating.
That's it, yeah.
So I'm just trying to think if we went backwards on the 90 days, that's a short-term gain, but you're back to supporting operating capital
Right.
maybe a year sooner.
How do you get back to it? How do you get back?
Back to
To the 90?
The rate increase.
with the rate increase.
So you're talking about any increases, then go to reserves to be able to build it up faster than, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm just
Well,
trying
you don't have
to.
to make a rate increase. Why would you bother the 90? Why wouldn't you just make a rate increase and go all the lot?
That's what you're saying. So
Yeah.
once we get to the 90, then any rate increase would be for additional
Yeah.
operating or additional capital expense.
That seems like the simpler way.
Right, and which
Yeah.
is the plan he
Yeah.
proposes is to get us there in the next 3 years. The problem is we need to increase the rates further than just the increase for capital and
Yeah.
operating, because we gotta fill up the reserve again. So in 3 years, we won't have to continue to do that
When do we have to rewrite our contract with the city
with the city.
for our water?
You mean
What
Lawrence?
do you mean, Lawrence?
Yeah,
I think it's a 40-year contract.
that's a lot,
40,
40 years. It's-
whenever it started.
Well, that's how long the contract is. I think we started it, we renewed it. We've always gotten water from Lawrence since the early 1900s, I think. Ever since Clinton Lake.
Since we
Do we
cut
know
off
that's
from the wells.
when that expires?
At one time, Corey, we had our own waters. We owned X amount of water in the lake,
I grew up on Lake, yeah.
you know, so
I remember the wells
all we
being
did
there.
was pay the city to treat that water for us. And then we paid the state so much a year for
For the capacity.
for our capacity
Right.
to keep it for us.
Right,
Now then, it's the other way around.
sure.
We gave that up.
We gave that up to keep rates down because now we can get a blended rate between the river and the lake. Where before we were always
Just
going
get
to.
to that river before anyway, I mean.
We were, but
That's
we
the
were
way it
getting
was.
charged for what Clinton was, which was
I know,
12 cents
I
a
know,
gallon,
I
and we're
know.
going to 44
But
cents a
you
gallon.
never knew where the water was coming from. It was either coming from we're claiming, you never do that. I went through all that. You can't tell what's coming, where it's coming.
But the
from.
contract ties us to the lake
So
rate.
when is the next increase in our contract?
It's built in annually with Lawrence rate. They have to, it's tied to, if they, whatever they do to our citizens, their citizens, they can't do any more to us. I believe is how that contract was written.
Now what?
The percentage of increase can't go above and beyond what they're charging their citizens.
Okay,
So it's tied to that. It's
so if they raise their citizens, they raise ours.
pretty much. It's how it was before.
Now, the difference is what you showed in the 5,000 gallon versus 1,000 gallon, where Lawrence has they made the decision to charge lower rates for their
Right.
higher
It's tiered.
tiered rates. So that's why you saw the disparity, whereas it's all one rate here.
How much water are we allowed a year? On a 40-year contract?
I'd have to read that. I'd have to look back at that contract. It's been 3
You're the mayor, you're supposed to know all this. You're supposed to be able to answer these questions.
no less than what we were getting on the last contract.
Oh, here we go.
Back in 1993.
Am I asking the wrong one, Glenn?
No, I don't know off the top of my head either. We just redid that contract because our Clinton Lake contract did expire 3 or 4 years ago now, and we did go with Lawrence in a blended rate. I don't remember them off the top of my head though, but we can find it.
We might as well get on out of here and get something else to do.
I appreciate your time tonight.
Sorry, we just stand.
What's that?
Forever.
Yeah, I can't get done.
You made a good presentation, thanks, Boo.
Any other discussion on that agenda item?
Every time you say that, you look at me, am I supposed to say something?
I mean, you have all night, so I just figured I'd ask. Okay, so for the next agenda, we'll put the reserve fund policy on there. Scott, I presume that in the finance committee, you'll talk about the ordinance side of this. Take a look at that,
The current one.
the current ordinance, and see how those affect what was already in there.
As far as the rates or
The rates.
yeah, we do need to compare to what the current ordinance says and what this plan does.
Yeah,
And-
because we'll have to amend that ordinance.
Right.
We have to go with this. Okay. All right. Anybody else like to make a comment to that agenda item? Ben can hang out for a little longer.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks,
Hey,
Ben.
Ben, thank you.
How do you put that, how do you make a brake stop pushing that?
All right, next item on the agenda is something a little bit more positive. Library board appointment. Was notified that one of our library board members was stepping down at the end of April. So we opened up a search through the city social media, through the library social media. We had 3 really good applicants. Myself, Wendy, and Glenn interviewed all 3 of them. And then we had a round group discussion with the library board to kind of decide on the final one based on the notes from that interview. All 3 of them would have been excellent. I mean, it was a hard, could have picked any 3 of them. I could have, it would have been fine. But kind of talking to the board and everything, my appointment for this board position will be Katie Wigner. Katie, if you want to kind of step forward and introduce yourself to the council.
Hello. My name's Katie Wagner. I moved here in 2016 with my husband. We have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. Currently, I teach 7th grade language arts in Gardner, but I just took a position actually here at the middle school teaching 8th grade for next year. So obviously, I teach reading and love reading, and I want to kind of combine that with the community. And like the mayor said, I saw it on social media and I thought, why not? And we had a great discussion, I thought, and I'm really excited to join the board.
Are there any questions for Katie?
Have you served on any boards before?
I have not, but I've been teaching for 10 years. And like we talked about, my mom was the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and I grew up working every summer with the chamber. I was heavily involved in a sorority at Washburn University, so I feel even though this is my first board, I'm going to bring a lot of good ideas and things like that. Thanks.
What's your husband do?
He works in benefits for Evergy.
For Evergy?
Mm-hmm. So all
What's
those
he-
rates and things you guys were
What's he
talking about.
think about this?
He's excited. He actually applied to be on the rec board, so I don't know if you guys have any decisions with that, but
Good.
put in a good word.
That's good, that helps.
Yeah.
We need a motion? I'll make a motion.
All right,
How do
Jerry.
you want it said?
To approve the appointment to the library board of Katie Wigner.
You did very well, thank you.
You have to make the motion.
Yeah, I can't make
I
that.
just made the motion. He just repeated it.
All right, Jerry motions, is there a second?
I second.
Been moved and second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is Baker University Street Alley vacate. Russ.
All right, good evening, everybody. Basically, this is a street and two alleys that are getting vacated over at Baker University. These alleyways, both alleys and this street section actually run through their softball field and the baseball field. It's never been utilized as an alleyway or a street. Basically, what this does is it actually just kind of cleans up the parcels, which was part of Planning Commission's action items that they needed to do for their development plan for the new Baker sports complex. So it's pretty standard in this regards. This shouldn't affect any citizens. We have no public utilities that would be affected with this vacation as well. So, anybody have any questions that I could answer?
I'll make a motion, we vacate the
So, hold on a second. It says the real estate included in the alleys and stuff. So does that go to Baker?
Yeah, so
Property
basically, so anytime we vacate an alleyway or a street, with how state statute works, is that whoever the owner is on the one side as well as the other side, they would each get half. So if the alleyway is 20 feet, the person on the north would get 10 and the person on the south would get the other 10, is basically how it works as far as state statute.
I was just curious.
So when this is an ordinance that you guys will be voting on.
Is this alley or street got a name?
So, the street is actually Grove Street,
Grove?
which was a part of the original, and this is part of the original plat for Baldwin City.
Correct.
And then the alleyways, we're calling it the Fremont Grove alleyway as well as the Grove High Street alleyway. Is kind of how with how everything lays, because the first true street is Fremont to the north and to the south is High Street.
So Liston Stadium's on top of an alley, an existing alley.
Next to it.
No, it's,
Next to it, so
how can that be possible?
Well, it's
Look
that,
at your picture.
isn't it
The
that?
ball diamonds, right?
The ball diamonds
I
are.
got it. Okay.
so
And it's Second Street.
I got the annotated pull up. I'll pull it.
originally this was supposed to have been cleaned up.
No, you gotta go to the agenda packet itself.
You gotta go online.
Oh, okay, that's why. I was gonna say it'd be helpful to have a map.
So here's I'll give you this map. This one.
That's okay.
Sorry, I added the map tonight, earlier
Oh,
today.
that's okay.
Hey,
Not that it
Yeah,
matters, I'm
that's-
just curious.
That's
So-
what I was,
So part of this was actually when they redid the football stadium, I guess years ago, and then part of the Second Street vacation. This was all supposed to be cleaned up years ago. The problem is that the legal description was not correct, so it never got taken care of, and it just kind of, went by the wayside. And then when they did the redevelopment plan, for the new sports complex. We kind of put that in there as some of the things that they needed to go finish. And this was the alley and street vacation.
What's the name of the street to the east of that?
Well, it'd be Second Street.
Runs north?
That runs north, but that actually has
Is there any
been,
chance of all that brush and stuff that they cleaned out that fence?
well, that's First Street. That's First Street.
Yeah.
That you're talking about.
East of Western State.
I'm talking, basically where Second Street, well, there's Second Street, which was vacated, but Third Street, which runs from basically, if you turn there right on High Street, you got your park that's right there on the left or the west side of the road.
First Street's what I'm talking about there.
So that'd be another discussion for another time, because part of that falls in the
I was gonna
floodplain.
make a bargain with you. I was gonna make the motion to let you have it,
So,
to clean up the brush.
yeah.
So I'm gonna leave it up to somebody else. They can do it now.
Okay. So, like I said, this is an ordinance, so this is, 2 readings. This will be the first reading for this ordinance. So if anybody has any questions, or be glad to answer them at this time.
Say Second Street was already vacated.
So Second Street, that portion was already vacated. If you look on the map, it's still notated that it's still labeled as Second Street, but there is an actual ordinance that I found where it shows that it was actually vacated. Thank you.
Thanks, Wes.
All right, any other discussions on that agenda item? All right. Next item is certificate of deposit. Glenn, do you want to kind of,
Do you make a motion on this and pass it?
Not the first reading.
it's just the first reading of the ordinance.
Okay. I've heard that.
So this agenda item is our deposits. We have the 4 $1 million CDs that we have been sending out every 6 months for bid to the local banks to bid on. And then, so this round, Glenn, I didn't see
Got
any
two,
bids.
got 2 bids. One was Baldwin State Bank at 0.75%, and the other one's Mid-America at 1.25. That's for 2 years. That's the rate for 2 years on a CD. So the recommendation is obviously Mid-America.
Who do we have it with now?
Yeah, I think this one currently is with Baldwin. We got like 4 of them. There are usually 3 or 4 that are usually out there. We stagger them in different years, so.
Any other discussion or questions on this? No, I'll entertain a motion.
I move we accept the bid for a certificate of deposit from Mid-America Bank for 1.25%.
Moved and seconded, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes. Next, council committee report, Budget and Finance, Scott.
We talked about the utility, we talked about the utility rates, we talked about the we talked about everything we discussed. I think the only thing we discussed in the meeting that we haven't already talked about was the utility bill format change. And staff brought back the challenge that they're having trying to figure out something that works across the 12 different rate structures that we have. So I think what the committee recommends to the council is that we delay changing the billing format until we look at those rate structures as part of this, whole utility rate increase discussion. We need to look at the rate structure, see if there's any consolidation that we can do. We thought it would be confusing to change the billing structure and the rates at the same time. It'd be very difficult for people to understand, what was what, right? Because the numbers in the bill will change. So that's kind Corey's will continue to look at the format change, how we make it so it's doable on the staff. And the other thing we talked about was the script that will go with describing what those changes are and how there's no impact really to the citizens. We all need to have staff armed with that. We need to get it out on the website. We need to promote all that. So I guess our desire to have that utility rate format, utility bill format changed early in the year probably is going to be more like later in the year. But we'll do it when it makes sense. It's not critical. Did I miss anything we talked about?
No, I don't think we hit
Yeah,
most
we
of
hit everything
all
else.
the agenda items.
Next meeting Friday, it's Friday, 7:45 a.m. at the second floor of City Hall.
We need to go and record.
Yeah, we met on the 28th. Discussed the community center, no real update. Everything looks like it's right on schedule with Jay's projections and everything. The first real fundraising event is going to be the first rec event in June for the concert at Sullivan Square. We're gonna piggyback with them and have a lot more foot traffic and hopefully get more eyes and donations that way. Be a little bit warmer, people more out and about, so kind of focus on the summer for that. Also discussed the trail is up again because we have a lot of this money coming down the pike from, well, through the state and the feds. The one coming up now is the RAISE grant. They all have different acronyms and they kind of come up with different ones for every one of them, but there's a whole bunch of them that keep opening up and we expect several more. The RAISE grant, the trail project, probably going to be about $20 million and there's money out there for it. And so if we could apply for that and see how much of that, at least get a good chunk of it out of that and kind of do that for all these other ones that keep coming down. But, you know, the one thing that was encouraging about that is, you know, with these big grants, you're like, okay, well, the matching funds and all that. It sounds like the money that we've already committed towards sidewalks and the trail would shave off a pretty good chunk of whatever those matching funds would be. And I'll pass this on to Casey's got a little bit more of a trail conversation for his piece, but yeah. So that RAISE grant's kind of the next one that kind of have your eyes on. You know, I think when this all started, kind of thought about chipping away at it one leg at a time and, you know, eventually maybe get this thing done down the road. And with all the funds coming available through the state and through the feds, it'd be really awesome if we could get it all done in one big sweep. So lots of opportunities out there.
Yeah.
Explore them all.
So we put in for 2 grants, one for the feds, one for the state of Kansas, because there's some funding out there for what they call it. It's geared towards connecting rural areas for various services. Well, we were working with RG Fiber, and part of our easement allows for a fiber line to go down to Ottawa. So that was beneficial, and that is what helped elevate it. We should hear about the state one because the state has $700 and some million sitting there for this type of infrastructure stuff.
How much?
700 million. The applicants that they received was 8 billion. So
we have a shot.
so we'll see how this plays out. It was a very simple thing. It's just a quick application for us to fill out. The other one's a federal government one. They obviously have way more. I don't even know how much. A little bit more political, but a portion of it has to be reserved for the rural areas. So we felt like we might as well try to take advantage of some grants for our walking stuff here in Baldwin. So that's kind of what we're doing to piggyback off Corey's. Be interesting. We'll see. State
Yeah, I
one.
hope you get it done so I can drive my rascal up and down before I die.
Good. Might need some off-road tires though.
We met with the Department of Wildlife because that was kind of our first, you know, maybe we can join them on, I know they like building trails. They're doing the one was at the Flint Hills Trail out there. And then, we met with them and first they were just kind of like, no, don't come to us. You guys need to be doing stuff like this. Because we're asking for money too. But it was made pretty clear that, a lot of this infrastructure money has to do with technology. And us being able to have dual use of that trail with varying infrastructure connecting Ottawa with the high-speed internet makes us a really strong candidate.
It's pretty neat. I've been talking to a lot of the state senators that sit on that committee or had prior to us submitting our application. And I actually think that we have a pretty decent shot they want shovel-ready projects. The engineering has already been done on that project. It was done years ago. So it's going to be intriguing to see how this all falls. So we'll see.
That's it. Next meeting, April 25th, 4 o'clock, second floor City Hall.
Public safety, Jerry.
We did not have a meeting due to the fact that the chief had other things going on and he canceled it out, right?
Correct.
Public Works, Julie.
We met on March 17th, and I put in the packets the proposals for the water line project on 400 Road from 6th to Ridge Lane, and the Orchard Lane culvert replacement proposal. So I think we're putting those out for bids, and we're waiting for those to get back, right?
We're still engineering both of those projects. I think Orchard Lane will probably go out in May or June, and the water line probably will be about that same time. We're doing some survey work and that kind of stuff right now.
That was a major thing I had for my report. At this time, I'd like to talk about a little bit about the tour that I took of the Public Works facilities, and the department heads were there to explain how things work and answer any questions that we had. And I thought it was evident that the guys take pride in their work and have so much knowledge about their jobs. And I would like to thank them for all they do and encourage citizens to tour the facilities. Our next meeting will be April 14th at 9 o'clock.
Strategic planning, Scott.
We have not met since the last council meeting. We're waiting to wrap up our strategic planning session. Current vendor, I don't want to name names, protect the innocent. And then I think the plan is to try to take that input, as we talked about before, and then make some suggestions out of the committee about how we might advance it, enhance it, change it if needed, because this council hasn't really talked about the vision, mission, all that. So I think we'll have a regular cadence of addressing it, looking at it, making changes as a council, and trying to make sure that, unfortunately, I think we can take what's coming out of this next session and then have that at least as some basis for our budget planning process, right? Because if we have a strategic plan, that ought to influence what we do in the budget. So that conversation, we'll have some baseline to have that conversation. But I don't think it's going to be the end of the strategic plan. It's always evolving, but I think this is just kind of a start. So next meeting will to be determined. We'll see, what comes out of the meeting with Patty, and then we'll probably set the next meeting a couple weeks after that.
Good. City administrator, staff comments, anything?
No, nothing further.
Any further council comments?
I'm sure that you're all aware that I attended the water conferences in Wichita. And I attended the lead and copper class. And that is a new deal that's coming up by the federal government putting out. They don't have it completely lined out yet, but I think they're looking at starting to test lead and copper in water lines from the meter to the foundation. And, I really hate to see that happen, because if you get back into some of these homes that were built in the thirties and forties, they got galvanized pipe. And that's carrying lead. But that was a very good class. I also attended the gravity sewer systems rehab options. And that was a very interesting class. They've come up with kind of a poly type pipe, and it goes through a machine, and it's heated. And instead of taking out a sewer line to replace it, they run this through the existing sewer line, and as it goes through, it covers everything up and stops all the leaks and everything, and hardens just like PVC pipe. It's not set to work for water yet, because I asked that question. Of course, you know I'm gonna ask questions. But they can't use it to make for water systems yet, but it works real good for sewers. And it also works real good for the tubes that go underneath roads. If your galvanized tube is rotten out, they can use that stuff and put it in there, and it just adheres to that tube and makes your drain better, and will last a lot longer.
Work on clay?
Dickie clay?
No, the material, clay. Like a sewage line, a clay sewage line, like terracotta sewage line.
It's Dickie clay tiles, what it is.
Oh, I thought you.
And it's 5 feet long.
Yeah.
And you can buy it.
Yeah,
Big
that's what I
drums,
mean.
it's rubber
Yeah.
gasket, and you push it together with a
Yeah.
shovel.
We'll work on
Yes,
that.
it would work on that.
Interesting. I know a lot of
Didn't
people.
they utilize that on our east side?
Parts of that, yes.
What'd you say?
They utilized that on our east side interceptor when we did our.
See, this, I never didn't, well, I installed sewer years ago, but that was all an entirely different system than what they do now. We didn't use lasers, or we did it with batter boards and sticks and shovels and that kind of thing. But I found it to be very interesting. The open session, or the open meetings records is pretty much following this book, this open records book that's been handed out. I think she gave me one, and I've read quite a bit of it, but it follows pretty much the guidelines. And it's very interesting. There's a lot of questions in there that might come up to somebody that's dumb as I am, that you can get an answer out of that book if you can read. But this so happens to be a picture at that spot that where I wanted to know something, so I got it just fine. And I went to the opening session on Wednesday morning at 8:30, and that was they had a keynote speaker there. He portrayed himself to be Festus on Gunsmoke, but he gave on work ethic, motivational type stuff. And of course, Butler County Community College, they always have a little group come in and they do some singing and stuff. And actually enjoyed it, and thank you for signing me up to go. The paperwork and everything was right on the spot when I got there. I appreciate it. If any of the rest of you ever want to do something like that, I would suggest that would be something that would be interesting to everybody. And incidentally, I brought some stuff from the show, and it can be passed around, and anybody that wants anything out of that bag can have it. There's one thing in there that belongs to Casey. And as it comes around, he'll know what it is, and so will the rest of you. But
Jerry's swag bag.
and you can even have the bag if you want.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for going, reporting out.
It's a good show. There was about 250 booths set up, and they cover anything from work trucks to backhoes to bulldozers to grasshopper mowers, you name it, it's there. And then all the booths that have little stuff that, like keychain or something like that. But if she sets that bag out and there's anything in it that anybody wants, help yourselves.
Jerry already took what he wanted.
Yeah.
No, there's not much in there that I want.
All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second. Been moved to second, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed nay, motion passes.